wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Sunday Stoic Podcast. This week we are joined once again by Donald Robertson. If you don't know Donald, make sure to go back and check out our previous interviews. He is a big hitter in the world of modern Stoicism. Donald has a new book coming out, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, the Stoic Philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, and the book hits the shelves on April 2nd, 2019. And I really enjoy the book, and I highly recommend you check it out. If you want to see this podcast as a video, you can check it out on YouTube, and I'll put a link in the show notes. Welcome to the Sunday Stoic Podcast. Today I'm joined by Donald Robertson. Donald, where are you coming to us from this week?
Well, I've been traveling a bit recently, so as people can probably tell, I'm originally from Scotland, but I recently got my Canadian citizenship, and I was living in Nova Scotia. I now live in Toronto, and I'm speaking to you from Austria, and actually from a place called Carnuntum, which a lot of people might not have heard of, unless they're super nerds about Stoicism, like we are, and they might know that Marcus Aurelius says in the Meditations, very helpfully, at Carnuntum. So this is a place where he was stationed for part of the Marcomannic War and where he wrote at least part of the Meditations.
So is there anything there commemorating Marcus Aurelius?
Anything here? Well, I'm in the Marcus Aurelius Hotel, and in the Marcus Aurelius Hotel, you can even have a Marcus Aurelius hamburger.
Wow.
And a Marcus Aurelius steak. And I don't think there's a Marcus Aurelius beer, though. They just have kind of regular Budvar here on draft, but there's all the whole museum here. There are two museums and a lot of archaeological sites, and a lot of Marcus Aurelius themed stuff in the local area. It's a big thing for the local town, as you might imagine. Yeah,
I'd imagine so. It's kind of a big name. I would assume people in that area have heard of him from sources other than Gladiator the movie, unlike a lot of Americans, I'm afraid. But so
they've got.
Yeah, what brings you to Austria?
Why am I in Austria? Well, because I'm promoting the book and I'm doing podcasts and writing. I have to write a lot of articles and things like that. And I wanted to do some research, like for the courses that I run and other books that I'm writing. And as part of my previous research, I realized that there was a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of archaeological stuff and reconstructions as well. And I thought I'd come and check it out. A lot of people don't realize that there's quite a few things to see here. And I was going to travel to Athens anyway, so I thought if I'm going to go all the way from Toronto to Europe, I might as well stop off in Austria for a week and shoot some videos and do some research. And also because I'm probably 99% certain that I'm doing a graphic novel about Marcus Aurelius. So I thought it might be useful to know what some of these things look like.
Oh, yeah. You've had some concepts, examples online. Those are really cool.
That's right. Yeah.
So your new book, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, the Stoic Philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Now, quick question. Knowing a little bit of Roman history, I don't think I'd like to think like many of the emperors.
No.
There were some when I think of emperor, I think of tyrants. I think of a fat guy being fed grapes and doing nothing all day, maybe. But I get the impression Marcus's life didn't really fit into those stereotypes.
No, he was a bit different in that regard. Marcus is, even the emperors that lived, during that he reigned alongside. So we also kind of tend to think of the emperor ruling solely, but actually Marcus for the first time ruled jointly. So he was acclaimed emperor pretty much alongside his adoptive brother, Lucius Verus. and they were the emperors together side by side, although Marcus was kind of the senior emperor, as it were. And Lucius was more like your cliched, what's the expression? Kind of like a playboy almost, right? He drank a lot, he partied a lot, he loved the gladiatorial games, all the things that Marcus hated, really. So we were at the amphitheatres here, for example. There's 2 amphitheatres here. The Romans couldn't get enough of them. They've got 2. And I was saying to the staff here that Marcus hated the amphitheatre. He thought it was really boring. He didn't like going, but his brother, adoptive brother, loved it and couldn't get enough of it. He was kind of addicted to chariot races, the gladiatorial games. And Marcus's son as well, Commodus, is, something they would get from watching the movie Gladiator is that Commodus was really into the amphitheatre and gladiatorial games as well. So Marcus was more austere and his outlook like a Stoic. He liked to live a simple life. He was more introverted and reflective. He was a bit of a workaholic. He took his role as emperor incredibly seriously, whereas other emperors like Commodus treated it more as an opportunity to live like a celebrity, I guess.
That doesn't happen today, at least, in those that have power. So that's a good thing, right?
No, that would never happen.
Now, you kind of told us a bit about Marcus. So let's start just with his background. Who was this guy? I mean, he wasn't born an emperor. How did he get here? How did he get there?
Who was this guy? Well, he came from a patrician family, like a noble family, and his family actually came from Spain originally, although Marcus was born at Rome. And the Emperor Hadrian was childless, and so he had to appoint a successor. And the first guy he appointed a successor, who apparently nobody really liked that much, died prematurely, so that got off to a bit of a false start. And then Hadrian really liked young Marcus. He was at court because Marcus's family knew Hadrian, and they were kind of distantly related. And Hadrian kind of was impressed by Marcus and wanted him to succeed him, but he thought he was too young. So he appointed another older man called Antoninus Pius to succeed him on agreement that Pius would have Marcus as his successor. So Hadrian really was responsible for appointing Marcus through this long-term succession arrangement whereby it would be Hadrian succeeded by Antoninus Pius, and then he would be succeeded by Marcus eventually decades later.
So a bit of a complex succession there, but it paid off.
Yeah,
in a way.
And he made a good choice. And Antoninus and Marcus had a lot in common. Antoninus Pius wasn't a philosopher, but he had a similar kind of disposition or temperament. He resembled Marcus in being quite serious and austere, and taking his role very, very seriously. And funnily enough, although they were chosen by Hadrian, they're kind of different in temperament from Hadrian. Hadrian had a notoriously bad temper, and he was also quite an arrogant man. He was more into the sophists and rhetoric than into philosophy, although mysteriously Hadrian was supposedly good friends with Epictetus, which I find incredibly hard to imagine. Because Hadrian was very vain and temperamental, exactly the sort of person that Epictetus didn't like.
Right.
He had some kind of affinity for the Stoics, and he decided he wanted these Stoic-like characters to succeed him as emperor.
And Marcus started studying this philosophy as a young man, correct?
Yeah, a kind of unusually young age. I mean, a Roman boy might start studying philosophy perhaps at 15 or older. But Marcus got into philosophy, we're told, when he was about 12 years old, which would have been at an exceptionally young age. And actually, what we're told is that he first of all embraced the lifestyle of a philosopher before he even really got into reading philosophy and studying the theory. So he adopted the dress of a philosopher, and he slept on the floor and stuff like that. And his mum gave him into trouble for that, and she persuaded him that he should sleep in a bed like a normal person.
A lot of the Stoics get that. They're like Seneca tried vegetarianism and then was talked out of that, and Marcus wants to sleep on the ground, and his mom says, "Don't do that." That's interesting. The persuasiveness of parents in our philosophical training.
Yeah.
But apparently she didn't tell him to stop. He continued throughout his life.
Yeah, she had a kind of affinity for it as well. She was very interested in Greek culture. And Marcus says that she was unlike other wealthy people. She was an incredibly wealthy woman. She inherited a brick and tile factory that made her a kind of millionairess. But Marcus said that she was unlike other wealthy people. She lived a very simple life. And she possibly introduced him to some of his Stoic mentors. He suggests that she was friends with a guy called Junius Rusticus, who became Marcus's main Stoic teacher. So
this book itself is partially a biography. I found it interesting. It's not a typical Stoic book like others you have written or other, like Massimo or others. It's not just here's the philosophy and here are a few ways to apply it. While it does have that information, it's interweaved with story and biography, and I thought that was an interesting take. What led you to writing the book in this fashion?
Well, I'm glad it came across that way, because I was asked to write a book about Stoicism, and I thought I've done that already. And so a bunch of other people have been doing it as well. And I thought there are too many books on Stoicism now. There are lots of them, and I'd be reinventing the wheel. But I thought I kind of paradoxically like to write a book about Stoicism. Maybe I can find a way to have my cake and eat it. So maybe I can write it, but somehow and make it different. And my little girl, who was probably about 5 when I first started working on this, Poppy, used to be very demanding. Kids can be quite demanding, and she was always kind of saying, "Tell me a story, Daddy, tell me a story, Daddy." And I used to tell her bedtime stories every night, but also if we were on the bus or the train or whatever, she'd pester me for stories. And I used to tell her the only stories I knew were really about Greek mythology, so I told her about those. And at school, the other kids would be saying, "Who's your favourite superhero?" And they'd say it's Superman or Batman or whatever. And Poppy would say her favourite superhero was Hercules. So I probably think that's kind of odd. And then I ran out of stories about Greek mythology, so I just naturally kind of segued into stories about philosophers. And, like these stories about Socrates and Diogenes the Cynic. People kind of forget that a lot of what comes down to us isn't just the letters and the dialogues and essays of ancient philosophers, but also a lot of anecdotes about them. And one of our main sources for those is a book called The Lives and Opinions of Eminent Philosophers by Diogenes Laertius, which is, to a large extent, a collection of anecdotes about ancient philosophers. So an example would be, there's one of the most famous ones is Diogenes the Cynic supposedly encountering Alexander the Great, and Alexander the Great, the most powerful man in the world, saying, "What can I do for you? What do you want?" And Diogenes saying, "Well, could you step out of the way because you're blocking my view of the sun?" And that's a typical example of, there are many such anecdotes about these philosophers. So I used to tell her those stories, and she liked them, and I thought, well, she's kind of learning a little bit about philosophical values and attitudes from this. And I thought maybe I could do this with adults as well. And we make things kind of simple and interesting and accessible. And when I thought about that, I thought, one of the things about Stoicism is that people have these annoying misconceptions about it that we keep having to address.
Over and over again.
Over and over again. That the Stoics are kind of cold fish. They're like Mr. Spock. They're robots. Like they would be accepting everything, so they would just be very passive and do nothing and sit in their hands. They'd be unemotional. And then so you can argue about that, and you can refer to the theory and stuff. But actually, the easiest way to refute them is just to point at a Stoic and go, "Look, this guy over here, he's not like that, is he?" And that's kind of a quick and easy way to refute it. So if we point at Marcus Aurelius, we can go, "Yeah, like he obviously didn't sit on his hands."
Today with Amazon Business, Shannon Stuckey of Walburn Woodworking helped her team buy 63 circular saws.
Okay, Andy, take it easy.
Now she uses her time to focus on growing something big. Buy smarter, dream bigger. Visit Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying.
The guy was a workaholic, and he commanded the largest army ever assembled on a Roman frontier. and fought this war for 10 years, almost to defend the empire. So he wasn't a kind of stay-at-home sort of guy. He wasn't a stay-at-home Stoic. He went to the front line, and he the opposite of what people might think. And he was also very tender and affectionate and a loving man. He wasn't a kind of Mr. Spock type character at all. He had a good sense of humour. And so Marcus is the easiest Stoic to describe, although, funnily enough, he's pretty much the last Stoic that we really hear about in the ancient world, 500 years after the school was founded, more or less after Zeno's time. And we know more about him than any other Stoic because he was a famous dude. Right. He was emperor, and so there's archaeological evidence. There are 3 main historical narratives of his reign and the Roman histories of Cassius Dio, the Historia Augusta, Herodian. And so, we can tell more of a story about him. And there are bits of his life that reflect his philosophy, arguably, and that allows us to paint this more rounded and human picture of what it would be like to be a Stoic. And so I think that's another way of introducing people to the subject. It's nicer in a way because it makes it more personable. You can view him as a sort of role model, and he seems more like a rounded flesh and blood Stoic than the idea you might get just from reading dialogues or letters from the ancient world.
Yeah, and so I like also you have that biography, but you've intertwined it with pure Stoicism, if you will. Here's what the Stoics said. Here's what Zeno might have said about this or whatever. And then also here's what you can do at home to build up your resilience or to work on your anger or your desire. And so you've kind of meshed that together using his example, and that had to take quite a bit of work to pull off.
With cognitive therapy, yeah, there was kind of a lot of work. I guess I have to know about the philosophy, I have to know about the history, and I have to know about cognitive therapy. So I think when I first suggested this to my publisher, they were kind of a little bit, like nonplussed by it. And that's partly, I didn't really realise this. They were kind of like, well, what genre is it? And I was like, well, it's kind of history, self-help, philosophy, mashup. And they were kind of like, well, Donald, let's explain something to you. In bookshops, they have shelves, and there's one shelf for self-help and another one for history, and then there's a different one for philosophy. Well, they're not going to put your book on all of those different. You're going to have to pick one, because that's how books work. Sure. And I was like, but I managed to persuade them eventually that we should do this kind of mashup. And actually, they want me to bring in more of the cognitive therapy stuff, because my background is in cognitive therapy. And naturally, if I say to people, this is how you would do Stoicism today, this is how you'd employ some of the psychological techniques, I would link that to cognitive therapy, because cognitive therapy gives us a better idea about what works and what doesn't, and what's practical in terms of dealing with emotions. The Stoics sometimes paint a slightly incomplete picture, or we might want to update things a little bit. But there's a kind of lineage, there's a connection there, because cognitive therapy was originally inspired by Stoicism and derived from it in some respects. So it's kind of the modern incarnation of it to a small extent. And that's how we ended up with this kind of weird hybrid creature of a book. And when I look at it, I pick it up now and I look at this book, I'm kind of surprised it's not bigger than it. It seemed a lot bigger when I was writing it. Well, why don't you hold it up for the camera, because we are recording video here as well. They can see the lovely cover. Yeah. The colour really smaller. See, it's not as big as I thought it was going to be, but it's kind of pint-sized and fairly readable. But it's less intimidating that way. That's fine. I'm used to biology books for class that are like the Bible glued to itself a couple of times. Yeah. I used to read all these philosophy books like Heidegger and stuff, and I think they were at least 600 pages long or something like that. And by the time you got halfway through it, you'd forgotten what they'd said at the beginning. But the chapters in it kind of starts off by talking about Marcus's death and setting the stage for his life. His death kind of bookends the book, doesn't it? Yeah. That's funny because, when I was writing it, I thought I'm going to go through his life in chronological order. And I thought, so we'll have to start with his education and his childhood. And that's one of the parts of his life that most interests me, because it's when he's learning about Stoicism, right? But I thought it's not really dramatic. I thought I want to really begin with something dramatic, and him going to school or whatever isn't really that exciting in that respect. It's not attention grabbing in the same way. So I had this great idea. I thought, let's start with him dying. That's dramatic, and it's quite stoic, dealing with death and contemplating death. We'll go right in the opening sentences. The emperor is dying, and then I wrote that. And then I thought I can have him then go back and we'll think about, going through his life from his childhood onwards. We can do it that way. But then I thought, now I've got a problem, right? Because when I reach the end of this book, I've already done his death. So does it just kind of fizzle out or something? How do I... And I didn't really have an answer to that. Funnily enough, it was one of those ones where I thought, I'm going to just start writing it and hope that I suddenly have a brainwave and figure out, what I'm going to do in the last chapter, because otherwise I don't have an ending for this book. And then I realised the way to do it is to go back to his death. And the first chapter describes it more from an external perspective, kind of drawing more on the Roman histories and the events surrounding his death. And then the last chapter, I thought, actually, I can go back to, we've got to the point of his death again. I can retell that story, but this time from an internal perspective, and how I think he would experience facing the reality of his own impending death through the lens of his Stoic philosophy, because he talks about it a lot. We can cover a lot of the philosophy and deal with this moment in his life from a subjective point of view.
Yeah, I thought that chapter was pretty interesting. It was like the inner commentary of him lying. I did have one question now before we can. What is it with Greeks and Romans covering their head with a sheet?
I don't know. Yeah, like they did, like they're sad and they hit themselves a lot. Like they used to sort of slap themselves in the face and bang their chest when they were upset as well, and pull sheets over their head. Yeah, like people express emotions in different ways in different cultures, and this is a thing that they did. Covered their head or hit themselves a lot when they're annoyed. Okay,
I remember reading about that with Socrates. Pulling the sheet over his head and dying, and Marcus in your last chapter does a similar thing. But while he's doing that, while you're talking about the actual pain he's going through, it's him reminding himself of his philosophy and how he's practiced it, and he's even practicing it all the way up to the very last moment. Basically, it was interesting, and it'll be interesting to hear that chapter in the audiobook format, which I assume is coming out, right?
You should say that. Yeah. Oh, geez, I've just recorded the audiobook in the space of a week. So that was a bit of a Stoic exercise in voluntary hardship. I was doing like 7 or 8 hour stints in the studio of Paw Patrol, by the way, in Toronto. They recorded the audio for the Paw Patrol cartoon. Yeah, so my little girl was quite impressed by that. But that was pretty draining. So we did all that audio. We did the last chapter first, actually, and I wanted it to sound like a guided meditation, right? So that when people listen to it, they'd be able to really kind of imagine, and when they were listening to the audiobook, what it would be like to think about things in this way. I wanted to turn it into more of a contemplative exercise.
Right. Yeah, I think you'll probably, you've pulled that off. I believe it was well worth a read. Just putting this book together, I noticed there's a lot of citations, which is really nice. There's nothing I hate worse than random. You know how many times I found a random citation by Seneca online that turns up to not really be from Seneca, for example, or hard to track down sources sometimes. So I really appreciate all the work you did there.
I've read some of, don't get me started. There's a well-known biography of Marcus Aurelius that begins with a load of quotes from him, and it's got some quite impressive historical research in it. But if I remember rightly, some of the quotes are fake quotes off of internet quotation sites, and so these things kind of take on a life of their own, and they get perpetuated because people read them. So I thought, and also I thought people. Sometimes when I've talked about Marcus, a lot of people don't realize how much we know about his life, and so they think, "Are you making this up? Where did you read this?" So I've included all the references to the various.
I thought it was really interesting. I thought you talked about letters that were discovered from him to a tutor. That was really interesting. Could you talk
a bunch of his letters? Yeah. And they give us a window. One of the odd things about Marcus is, there's a bunch of people that say, well, they read the Meditations and they think Marcus sounds like he's really depressed or something, because he's talking about death and things a lot. And of course that's nonsense, because this is a theme in Greek philosophy. Like, it's a contemplative and philosophical practice. So it's not a reflection of his personality. This is something that he's doing quite deliberately. And then if we read his private letters, apart from the fact that the histories tell us that he was not gloomy and that he was quite genial and friendly, when we read his private letters, we get a pure kind of glimpse into what his personality was actually like. And he's good-humoured, friendly, incredibly affectionate, and warm to his friends and family, very concerned with family life and his children and his friends' children. Quite the opposite of what people might have assumed. Definitely, you really get a sense for him being a very loving and affectionate guy.
Right. Did any of your perceptions of Marcus change, or did you learn anything that you hadn't expected to find while researching this book?
Yeah, I guess there's like so many little things. It's kind of, and there's sort of like nerdy things that I'm interested in. This is an obscure thing that I didn't realize, but it means a lot to me. I think it is significant to me that Marcus is a distant relative of a guy called Buria Soranus, who was a member of the Stoic opposition. And so there were these kind of quite politicized Stoics, in the time of Domitian and Nero, who were really opposed to emperors that acted like dictators or autocrats. And Marcus's tutor as well, Junius Rusticus, was related to a member of the Stoic opposition. So he has this kind of family connection with these guys who were Republicans and in some ways opposed to the office of emperor, or they wanted, the emperor to act in a less dictatorial manner, which is kind of interesting. Because you do get the sense that Marcus has this vision of a slightly more democratic and egalitarian kind of version of the Roman Empire. He says so at the beginning of the Meditations. He says that his political vision is of an empire that makes its first and foremost value the freedom of its subjects. Mm-hmm. Surprisingly, it's a strange thing to hear a Roman emperor say.
Absolutely.
In his notes to himself, it's not probably that he says that to himself.
Yeah, I don't think his son followed up on that so well.
His son wasn't really interested in that. I get asked a lot about Commodus as well. And the main thing I'd say about Commodus was, to cut a very long and very complicated historical story short, Commodus was actually appointed Caesar when he was about 5 years old.
Wow.
And so he was designated as Marcus's successor. And I don't think Marcus would have done that, except for the fact that the plague and the Marcomannic wars probably frightened the Senate and made them think that there needed to be a succession in place. Because the thing that worried the Senate more than anything else was the possibility of a civil war,
right,
which Marcus actually faced at one point with another guy, with one of his generals. And so I think they thought there has to be a clear succession. Mm-hmm. And if you don't appoint your son as your successor, then you're always going to have this rival and waiting in the wings, and people are going to rally around him, like factions that are politically opposed to whoever you do designate.
Gotcha.
So we don't want to split the empire up.
Sure.
You kind of don't have any choice but to designate him as successor. And Marcus wasn't around a lot. Probably wasn't around a lot. I think Commodus probably visited him at the military camps, but probably didn't spend that much time there. So I don't think Marcus had much opportunity to make sure that Commodus was a Stoic. He had to entrust his education to other people, and apparently he tried to appoint the best teachers that he could, but he turned out the way that he did.
Well, we know how that works out. That didn't work out so well with Nero and Seneca, etc. So, yeah, I know I'm a little bit ashamed. When I first started this podcast, I had been reading Stoicism, and I thought it would be neat to have a Roman coin with Marcus Aurelius on it, and I found one from a fairly decent dealer online, and I ordered it, and And then I took a picture of it and I made it my podcast logo. And then I looked at it later and I'm pretty sure it's Commodus.
Well, they look very similar.
They do.
It's strange. Here's a little bit of trivia for you. There was a rumor during his life that Commodus was actually the illegitimate son of a gladiator. Right? Was one of the rumors. But the funny thing is, we can see from the statues that he's the dead spit of his dad. He looks just like Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, there's definitely a resemblance there.
And also, here's another little bit of trivia. Usually when people depict Marcus Aurelius, they imagine that he had dark hair or brown hair, but we're told that Commodus had blonde hair.
Really?
And several Roman emperors did actually. So given that they look so similar, it's quite possible that Marcus was blonde as well.
Yeah, never would have thought of that.
We don't know for sure, but certainly we're told Commodus was blonde.
Well, that's it. So it would be okay to depict them that way would probably be more legitimate than the blonde, blue-eyed Jesus that I often see depicted here in Arkansas. Yeah. Now, what are some of the major topics in between the chapters on Marcus leaving this world? What are some of the major topics you tackle in this book?
Apart from death, we should say it's not all death.
It's not all death,
There's a lot of death, and no, it's not all death. Like there's there are a few laughs in there. Well, not really, but they start off. As an aside, people sometimes say that the Stoics weren't known for humor, and they really were. The Stoics wrote satires, and Chrysippus was known for writing about puns. We have the satires of Persius, a contemporary of Seneca, and Seneca also wrote some satire as well. But one of my favourite stories about the Stoics is we're told, on dubious authority though, but we're told that Chrysippus died laughing at one of his own jokes about a donkey.
About what?
About a donkey.
A donkey.
A joke about a donkey, and it was so funny that he died laughing at it, we're told. So
Dang. There's a Monty Python skit like that, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like that sketch. And it's a good job that it's a good job that it doesn't translate well.
Yeah, we'd all be doomed.
That may explain why the Stoic school died off.
New theory.
Because the jokes were too good. Well, what's actually in the book is between the death, there's stuff about there's different chapters that are about different emotional problems, and so there's one about dealing with unhealthy desires and bad habits. There's one about anger management, which actually is one of Marcus's main concerns, and we know that he had problems with anger because he tells us at the beginning of the meditations that he struggled to control his anger. There's one about dealing with anxiety and worry. There's one about coping with pain and illness, which we know was also a problem for Marcus because he was notoriously frail and he had stomach pains. He maybe suffered from chronic stomach ulcers. And another theme that kind of runs into some of the chapters is coping with loss and bereavement. So those are like the major topics that it covers, each kind of divided into a separate chapter.
Well, it sounds like good things to work on if we're striving for arete or human excellence, right? Things we could work on to have a little better flow in our lives would be to conquer some of those issues. So yeah, and then Marcus has examples in his meditations that you pull from, along with his biography, and then a few other comments from other Stoics to help bolster your discussion. So
some other Stoic stuff, and it's a lot about Socrates as well, and some other philosophers that he would have been inspired by and influenced by as well, because I think that's important to round out the picture of the philosophy. The Stoics were kind of also drawing on inspiration from their predecessors. I noticed. I just read the book about from A. Long about the Epictetus and how much he quotes Socrates, and then Marcus quotes a lot from Epictetus, so you can see this lineage. It's quite interesting. Definitely.
Yeah. I thought it would be interesting just to ask you, because one of the chapters early on is about, once again, Marcus's meditations, of course, and then his youth, and he names in the first chapter of the meditations a lot of these people who helped to either make him who he was or that he could model his own life after as role models. Could you speak to a few of those, but just also the importance of doing that ourselves, of having models to follow in our own lives?
I think there are 16 of them, actually. There's a bit of trivia for you. I remember that. And it's also, incidentally, this is a bit of a nerdy kind of historical observation. It's interesting who isn't in there. Like, so having to explain the succession thing to you,
oh, right,
and that Marcus was kind of at Hadrian's court and Hadrian favoured him and all this, like, Hadrian's not mentioned. Although he mentions Hadrian's name briefly later in the Meditations,
right,
he's noticeable by his absence from Book 1, where he describes his role models. And the person he says most about by far is Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father. So he clearly puts him forward as the ideal role model as an emperor, like, and yet has nothing to say about Hadrian. Nothing good. If you haven't got anything good to say, don't say anything at all, kind of thing. And also his brother, Lucius Verus, his co-emperor, Marcus, has like a sentence about him, and it's kind of damning him with faint praise. It's kind of, if we read between the lines, what's significant is what he doesn't say. But yes, that's quite important, because it was one of the inspirations for what we said earlier about this whole approach to writing the book and taking Marcus as a role model. And so the Stoics thought the best way to teach people was leading by example, and lectures and books are kind of important, but it's more important to be a living exemplar of the philosophy. Zeno aimed to teach first and foremost by his way of life and the example he provided to his students, although he wrote books and lectured and stuff as well. So in Book 1 of the Meditations, Marcus spends all of this time. It's stylistically different from the rest of the text, and Marcus just goes through one person after another, listing their virtues. It's exclusively his teachers and his family members that he talks about, interestingly. So he doesn't really mention any military figures, for instance, like the generals and statesmen that he worked with. It's just teachers and family members. And he lists their virtues. And this is kind of an example of a Stoic contemplative practice. So he's identifying and verbalizing the qualities that he wants to emulate himself. And he kind of makes that clear, because he talks about himself being a disciple of Antoninus, for instance. Wow. Studying his behavior as a kind of template for the sort of emperor that he wants to be. And, I mean, he's writing this decades after, or let's see, it would have been at least 10, 15 years after Antoninus had died. Like, Marcus is still kind of very carefully listing and contemplating the traits that he wants to emulate from his predecessor.
Yeah, some people seem to be born with some of these traits, and the rest of us have to work our butts off to get there, right?
Exactly. I mean, I guess that's the funny thing, is Antoninus, as far as we know, wasn't really a Stoic. He knew philosophers and was friends with them, but he didn't adopt it as a way of life. And Marcus seems to be implying this guy was a sort of a natural Stoic, and whereas Marcus seems to think that he needs to work on himself to get there.
Yeah, like Epictetus, I believe it is, says that like becoming a doctor is easy compared to becoming a philosopher. We have to unlearn all the behaviors we've picked up growing up, and so we have to unlearn before we can learn, and that is very challenging. I know I myself did not have great models of how to handle anger growing up, and so I myself have fought that battle as well. I understand Marcus there.
Yeah.
So, now, who do you think would benefit most? Who should grab this book? Anyway, if you've read your previous works, if you've read other contemporary books on Stoicism and some of the classics, is this a book that could still be for you, or is this for the brand new Stoic in training?
Well, obviously I'm going to be tempted to say everybody should buy a copy, buy two. But in all honesty, when I was writing it, I guess it was kind of a side effect of the way I approached it. Like, I wanted to make it an introduction, but because I'd already written one and there already were loads coming out, as I mentioned earlier, it needed to be like a radically different sort of introduction, a different approach to it. So I do think that people who are completely new to Stoicism, I was hopeful that people who are new to the subject would be able to read this book and treat it as their way into the subject. And that maybe even if they hadn't read the Meditations, it would be a good way to prepare them for reading that book. And actually, the early reviews that we've had from people, some of them are people who knew nothing about Stoicism and said that they found that they could relate to it and it was a good introduction. But also, I wanted to write it in such a way that through approaching it from a different angle, people who were into Stoicism already and had read some books about it might find that it was new. A lot of it was new to them, or kind of approaching things from a new perspective. So people have maybe read the Meditations, but maybe didn't really know as much about Marcus's life or some of the historical context or even some of the philosophical context. So that might, I think that when people study the background, they get almost twice as much out of the Meditations. So I was hopeful that people that are already familiar with Stoicism might find that this gives it like a second wind, as it were, and a fresh perspective on things.
I fall into that last camp. I've been poking around at this philosophy here for a couple years now, and I definitely got a lot out of the book so far. So I recommend it, even if you think, oh, well, I've read the Meditation 7 times. Well, like I said, you did a lot of outside reading there. There's a lot of citations, a lot of information that I wouldn't have known to look for. And I highly recommend it for that reason. It's the background information is worth it alone, but then the intertwining of the Meditations with the background along with information from CBT really makes this a worthwhile book in my opinion. So I appreciate you letting me thumb through it.
Good, I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's for beginners and experts alike then. It sounds like an extravagant claim, but I think, yeah. And like I say, I'm surprised it's not bigger. I got it. I was like, really?
Maybe the type is really, really tiny.
Yeah, it's really small type.
That's what
There's a lot of different stuff crammed in there.
There is. I was going to say, that's what my students do when I give them a page limit. They shrink the font down to make it fit. Yeah. Normally it's the other way around. They need one page so they make it bigger. But I thumbed through the book and there was I've read several chapters so far and I've found them quite enlightening and I could see that you must A, really like Marcus Aurelius. I have a feeling, and then B, this itself must have been a labor of love of some sort because it took a lot of work to put together, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I teach a course about Marcus Aurelius online, and so I've kind of dedicated quite a lot of time to this, and, definitely really immersed myself in the subject. And, I'm here now where perhaps Marcus Aurelius had even been in these, walked in this very spot where I'm in the Marcus Aurelius Hotel. And maybe he had a Marcus Aurelius burger here.
He might have, yeah.
We were at the amphitheatre just earlier. There are 2 amphitheatres here, and I was like, almost certainly Marcus would have been here. He would almost certainly have gone to the amphitheatre. I mean, in fact, we know that he kind of got into trouble because he tried to avoid going. And people really frowned on that. They thought he needed to show his face and be seen by the public. So he must have been in that amphitheatre where we were just walking.
That's pretty amazing to step foot where Marcus stepped foot. Yeah. That reminds me of one other thing I read in your book. Like I said, there's all kinds of neat information in there that he didn't want to go to the amphitheater. They thought he should be seen in public, but he also would show up at a philosophical lecture and just sort of sit in like a regular person. Is that correct?
Yeah. When he was older, it was usually younger men that went to the lectures, and there's a story about how he went even when he was older, and people were kind of amazed by this, and they thought it was funny. They still be doing that. And also when he was a younger man, there's a weird story about one of the most famous Stoic teachers, Apollonius of Chalcedon, had been in Rome and then went back to Greece, and he was summoned by Antoninus Pius to teach Marcus Aurelius when he was probably aged about 15, and so he travelled all the way back from Greece to Rome, and then Apollonius was giving presumably lectures in his house, and said that Marcus should come and join the other students, and Antoninus Pius was like, well, no, you should come and teach in the palace. And then Apollonius sort of dug his heels in and said, no, I can come and study along with all the other students. And Antoninus said, well, apparently it's easier for you to make the trip all the way from Greece back here than it is for you to get up and walk down the street. Like 5-minute walk to come and teach him. But he caved eventually. And it sounds like Marcus went and studied alongside other, nobles or ordinary citizens, as it were. And this was seen as a slightly odd thing to do. But also the Stoic thing that they thought he should, be alongside other ordinary students and not treated as a special case.
Yeah, that's kind of powerful when you think about it. The emperor going out and participating in these. I wish more of our leaders would go out and participate in these sorts of discussions. Although we don't have a lot of those discussions, perhaps. The most philosophical conversations I've found myself in have been at the pub, I think, rather than at a.
I saw something else about that, actually. It's funny. Sometimes we read these things in the histories, and then we're not really sure how true it is, and then occasionally you'll get like some archaeological evidence that seems to substantiate it, and you think, wow, it turns out this was actually true. So we're told several times that Marcus would dress down, dressed like an ordinary citizen, and he didn't really like to wear imperial robes and things, and this is unusual. And you think, well, is this true? Is this just kind of propaganda or something like that? To make him seem more normal than he actually was, more of a regular guy than he actually was. But there's a statuette in the British Museum that's believed to come from Egypt, and it depicts him wearing a shirt, other kind of ordinary, dressed as an ordinary citizen. So there's a basic piece of archaeological evidence that supports it, and apparently that's a very rare depiction of an emperor. So there's even an archaeological find that substantiates this idea that perhaps influenced by Stoicism, he thought, I'm not wearing all this purple attire, I'm just going to dress like a regular Joe. That'd be like wearing a T-shirt or something.
That's right. It's the emperor in his PJs or something. I thought that reminded me of something I read in your book, and then my mind was making connections as well, is that this idea of the purple dye comes up several times throughout Stoicism, doesn't it? Its founding all the way up through Epictetus. I actually put a tweet on yesterday that I should have called my podcast the Purple Thread Podcast. Then maybe people would be into sewing, would accidentally listen, and I could grow my audience that way. Yeah. And then Marcus talks about, you can elucidate, but I think dyeing your soul or dyeing your mind or something rather than your robe. Could you talk about that a little bit?
I think that's probably a metaphor that goes all the way back to Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, because there are these, Zeno, the Phoenician people were dye merchants, and they traded this extremely difficult to make and expensive purple dye, sometimes called imperial purple. And it was made from a shellfish that had to be kind of fermented and, painstakingly extracted this dye by hand. It took a long time to manufacture, even a small quantity of it. And the story goes that Zeno was in a shipwreck, and so the dye just all went back in the ocean and dissolved, and his whole fortunes, basically, dissolved.
I can picture this big purple blob in the ocean as the ship goes down.
According to one story, anyway. And then he went to the Delphic Oracle, all these good stories, ancient Greek stories, and she said, you should dye your mind with the colour of dead men, which seemed like a kind of strange piece of advice to him. And he realised that what she meant eventually, he realised that he had to study the philosophy of philosophers from previous generations, such as Socrates, presumably, and kind of dye his mind, really absorb their teachings at a deeper level, rather than, and it's an interesting kind of idea, Marcus seems to refer to that. This idea that the Stoics have that, we talked earlier about the contrast between, we didn't talk earlier about the contrast between rhetoric and philosophy that's really central to Socrates, but it was a big thing for Marcus as well. So rhetoric in the ancient world, or sophistry, was about creating an appearance of virtue or wisdom, whereas the philosophers thought, no, it's more about, the reality of gaining wisdom and the truth. And so dyeing your clothes purple would make you appear regal, But to become truly regal, like paradoxically, you might embrace poverty and renounce wealth. Like, who's more regal, Alexander the Great or Diogenes the Cynic, who lived in a barrel and went around naked and nothing? So the Stoics would say, well, Diogenes was more regal because he had freedom and strength of character and deep in his soul. And so Zeno abandoned this life of trading in purple dye and decided what he really needed to do was transform his character to become kingly and independent, like a Stoic. And Marcus says, that he shouldn't allow his mind to become Caesarified and dyed purple, like someone who's overly concerned about their external appearance, but rather he should dye his mind with the wisdom of the philosophers that he's studying.
Well, I hope we can live up to that ourselves.
Yeah. Because your listeners should be dyeing their mind with the content of your podcast.
There you go. There you go. Put the earbuds in real tight and hold your breath.
Put those earbuds in tight. Yeah.
Well, Donald, is there anything else you'd like to mention? Anything coming up that we should know about?
Well, there's things I do always have things that I'm supposed to plug because of my connection with the Modern Stoicism organization, So there's this non-profit that promotes Stoicism that was set up in 2012 by Chris Gill, who's Professor Emeritus of Ancient Thought at the University of Exeter. And it's run by a multidisciplinary team of philosophers, classicists, psychologists and therapists. And I'm one of the founding members of Modern Stoicism. And so we run Stoic Week every year, which is this free online event that people can do. And last year, 8,000 people did that. So that happens every year. And we also have the conference, Stoicon, every year. It's about modern Stoicism. And I organised it a couple of years ago in Toronto. And I'm helping to organise the next one, which is going to be in Athens. Wow. So that'll be an experiment. It's a bit further afield, but surprisingly, Stoicism isn't a big thing in Athens. It's bigger in Toronto, ironically, paradoxically. So Stoicism is going home to Athens, and it'll be interesting to see how many people fancy a trip.
And if my listeners want to buy me a plane ticket, you can...
Well, go on then. Like, if you've got any listeners that are feeling generous, they might want to fund you to go and attend the conference in Athens. I mean, it's a fantastic thing for anyone to go there who's interested in philosophy, and I really wish more people from North America were able to make the trip out there, because there's so many things to see. You realize things when you go to these places. So you've read in Marcus Aurelius about the view from above, for example. Right. There are these passages where he says, imagine the law courts and the political assemblies and the merchants and the marriages and everything, all of this human life unfolding far below you, and picture it as if it's from some high watchtower. And other philosophers talk about this, but when you go to Athens and you ascend the Acropolis, the high up part of the city, and you look down from where the Temple of Athena and the other buildings are there, you realize that's what Athenians would see when they look down from the Acropolis. That's exactly what you see, because it looks down on the Agora, the marketplace, city centre, where the political assemblies and the market stalls were located. So you think, well, literally, they would have been pretty familiar with this kind of elevated perspective. And it was a sacred part of the city as well, which they would have associated with the gods. So there's a kind of tangible immediacy to it when you visit some of these locations.
That would be pretty amazing. Kind of a Stoic pilgrimage, if you will.
Yeah. So I'd recommend it. And if anyone wants to come along, that's where we're having the conference this year. Is that in the summer or in the fall, or when will that be? October. Yeah, beginning of October. Okay. We haven't really announced it yet, so hopefully we'll announce the lineup of speakers shortly. Yeah,
great. So Stoic Week, Stoicon. Are you doing anything else? Any more courses or anything else we should know about?
Well, I have my online courses. I run a course on Socrates and a course on Marcus Aurelius, which is running at the moment, but I do those a couple of times each year. Okay. And then this book is coming out, but I'm 99% sure the next thing I do after this is going to be a graphic novel. That's kind of, I did mention that earlier, didn't I? Yeah. So hopefully the graphic novel is going to happen about similar kind of things about the life and philosophy of Marcus Aurelius. Wow. And what I'm hoping is that that'll make it more accessible to younger people, like maybe teenagers and stuff as well.
So your new book, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, The Stoic Philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, comes out April 2nd. Is that correct?
2nd of April. It's pretty soon now. Yeah.
Yeah, 2nd of April. So coming up in just a week or two from the release of this podcast. So
yeah.
And if they want to know more about you and what you do, where should they go?
You can go to my website, which is just my name. It's just donaldrobertson.name. So not .com, but .name. And, my e-learning site, which has got kind of like a bunch of free courses on it and downloads and stuff as well, and some ebooks and things, is just learn.donaldrobertson.name. And if anyone wants to know about Modern Stoicism, the non-profit organization, that's just modernstoicism.com. And you'll find a lot of stuff there as well, downloads and videos and e-learning. There are over 500 blog articles by dozens of different people. Yeah, it's got to the point now where it's almost like a sort of database. So somebody says, do you know anything about Stoicism and autism? Or do you know anything about Stoicism and like undergoing painful surgery or something? Then I might think, well, if we just search on the Modern Stoicism site, possibly there's like 1 or 2 articles on there about it that people have written.
Wow, it's like Stoipedia.
It's like Stoipedia almost, yeah, exactly. So it's definitely worth having a look at that now that it's got so much stuff on it.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us this week. And
it was a pleasure.
I hope you'll enjoy the rest of your journey and have a Marcus Aurelius burger for us.
I will do, yeah.
Donald Robertson, once again, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Steve.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The Sunday Stoic. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review The Sunday Stoic on iTunes. Become a member of the Sunday Stoic team, earn rewards, and be an integral part of the show by becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/SundayStoic. Contact the show by emailing sundaystoic@gmail.com or by leaving a voicemail at 501-503-3132. To find out more, visit www.sundaystoicpodcast.com. And as Steve always says, Carpe Diem.